In a major legal victory for the former president, the Trump-appointed judge overseeing his federal classified documents case has dismissed that case. Judge Aileen Cannon ruled this morning the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. The Justice Department has authorized Smith to appeal the ruling, but for now, the case is done. Trump was facing 40 charges, including willful retention of classified documents and obstructing official efforts to recover that material. Two of Trump's aides, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, were also charged in an alleged scheme to block the investigation. The ruling means their cases are dismissed as well. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, what did the judge base this decision on?
The appointments clause in the Constitution. And what she said is when you want to appoint somebody in our government, there's basically two kinds of people we're talking about. They're principal officers. And for a principal officer, you need the president and you need the Senate. So think about cabinet level officers, for instance, or think about federal judges. And then on the other side, we have inferior officers, just as they sound like. They're people who report to principal officers. In that case, we don't need the president to appoint and the Senate to confirm. Instead, what Judge Aileen Cannon highlighted is, in her view, you need a congressional statute that authorizes somebody, in this case, like the attorney general, to make that appointment. And what this entire opinion was about is saying, I will assume that special counsel Jack Smith is an inferior officer, but I don't see the congressional statute that authorizes Merrick Garland to make this appointment. So it's 93 pages, but in my mind, it boils down to that.
Is this a novel decision? Is it consistent with precedent, or does it scratch against it? And I'll make it a three-part question. Why did it take so long? This would seem to have been a foundational question from the minute this appeared before the judge.
I think I count yes, yes, and because there was just recently a hearing. So in terms of precedent, I will say my view is the understanding has been that you can do what Merrick Garland did, which is appoint a special counsel. And that understanding is in part based on a 1974 decision by the Supreme Court, where there was a question as to whether or not President Nixon had to comply with a congressional subpoena that was issued by independent counsel Jaworski. And the Supreme Court said yes. And there was language in that particular decision that said he has the power, the independent counsel has the power to investigate and issue this subpoena. What Judge Aileen Cannon said is that that was just dicta. It was just basically the court musing, but it wasn't binding language. I have seen other judges come out the other way, saying this is binding. But, John, you and I got to talk about the immunity decision, I think exactly 14 days ago, this question of presidential immunity. In that case, both in the oral arguments and then in a separate writing, Justice Clarence Thomas said, I think we should talk about the special counsel and whether or not he was constitutionally appointed under the appointments clause. So that's when this came up. Now, why now? In part because it was only fairly recently that there was a motion to have Jack Smith declared as somebody who was not constitutionally appointed. The hearing was fairly recent. The decision came today. In terms of the specifics of the timing of the decision, only Judge Cannon knows, but that gives us the timeline.
And finally, what happens now in terms of appeal, but also, I mean, this case was never going to happen before the election, but what happens to it in its future?
Well, this case was never going to happen before the election as it dragged on. But I will say that, in the beginning, and I think you and I talked about this, it looked like the strongest case. And it is, of course, based on a variety of different reasons. It was a case that it became clear that there would be no trial before the election. What happens now? The Department of Justice will appeal to the 11th Circuit. And then the question is whether or not the 11th Circuit agrees with Judge Cannon's analysis here. Again, I think her analysis does put her with the minority of jurists right now. And if they do, then the question becomes, is this appealed up to the Supreme Court? And I think, frankly, the other question is, will special counsel Jack Smith's appointment be challenged in the D.C. interference case? And will we potentially have a split decision? At that point, if the D.C. Circuit says yes to Jack Smith, the 11th Circuit says no, the Supreme Court has to step in.
and then it's 2028. I'm being facetious, but that seems like a lot of complicated behavior. And thank goodness you helped us explain so much of it. Jessica, thank you so much.